Okay, so in earlier videos, we've already gone through configuring your SMTP server for emails. We've set up a few data sources for our source and target locations and combined them in a config. We've also established a couple of our initial jobs. The first time you start in the application, you'll need to replicate all of the initial data and set up that database for ongoing incremental syncs. A good way to do that is to run a getGlobal for the first run. This command will provide all the threads per object and help download large data sets until the initial load is complete. Now you also have a command called getIndexGlobal, which can be useful if you want to skip downloading any deleted records during the first replication. So let's go ahead and build our database for the getIndexGlobal. I'll update my label here to reflect the new command. After the initial run, there are a couple of maintenance steps that are useful, especially if you're going to use the database for any bidirectional integration with Salesforce. These include the getIndexGlobal command, which builds referential indexes between the tables for all objects currently downloading in your download list, and the getReferenceGlobal command, which builds another reference table within the database. We're going to go ahead and save that and kick the job off. We see our running icon in the UI, which means our job is currently running. We also have our View Runtime Logs button here. Let's click that and watch the progress. If we hit scroll lock, it will pause the scrolling of the logs. As I scroll down, you can see that it is a multi-step job, and you can see prior runs for earlier executions of the job. At the top, you can see the release version the application is running on, the Java version, and some pathing information for the directory structure. These details are based on the environmental variables that we set when we installed the application. As we continue, it will tell us which paths log files are being written to, allowing us to navigate to an individual log file on the file system. The logs contain useful information for the support team when troubleshooting issues, including the account directory you're operating from and the data sources being used. There's no confidential information being shared through the logging, but it provides an overview of what transpired during the job run. Since we're building out a fresh database, we'll see table create statements for the metadata location. Since we're using the same database here, all of these will be visible in the SQL Server Management Studio. You can identify which job ETLID was executed, the path directory to the Tomcat folder, and various other properties usually set within your warehouse config file, along with some network information for Salesforce. We echo our active users based on a user model, which is just a licensing check for the application. The logs will also print what data sources are being used and when those data sources would expire. New data sources typically have a 2-day or 48-hour window, and support usually updates them within the first 24 hours to match your contract terms. When Salesforce objects are downloaded, we always query the organization table, especially if it's the first time we're downloading any other information. The organization table provides the start date of the org, which is important for the queries that we execute to download the rest of the data. You will always get the organization table in your Salesforce downloads. Next, it shows what other object types we've enabled. We currently have standard, custom, and chatter objects enabled, while tag, share, and history objects are disabled. The history objects refer to the Salesforce history fields that you've enabled for an object in the Salesforce interface. As we continue through the logs, you'll see the account table with account X. This is because in SQL Server, account is a reserved word, so we append an X to help maintain proximity to the API name. As we go through the logs, we notice that for the account object, it found several records to download. And then you see the updated lines as it processes that record set. For each object being handled, you'll see the object name, the action being executed, such as download, the status, in progress or completed, timestamps, date ranges for the queries, and stats on what was added, updated, deleted, or moved to the history tables. If there are any errors, they will be listed in the errors column. The reads per second indicates how many records were read overall. This provides a rough calculation of how many records were being handled during that time. Once the first object finishes, it moves on to the next in the list. For example, after the account object, the next object is asset, which was handled in just a couple of print lines. You can see that it only took a few seconds and it's already moved on to case. You can continue trailing the logs to look at stats for other tables that have been processed. If you uncheck scroll lock, it allows you to move through different lines. The download portion will eventually finish, and you'll see the closing statements of the logs. Whenever it performs these cleanup steps, it's finishing up, and you should look for the completed successfully line. Overall, it took about 4 minutes to run the download for this collection of objects. Since it's a multi-step job, it then moves on to print log lines for other job steps within the same log file. It will print the same information for the getIndexGlobal command. As you scroll down further, you'll see the names of the indexes created for each of the tables. It also looks at associated tables. When uploading to Salesforce, we'll later discuss how this helps with lookups in the database. After the getIndexGlobal finishes, we move on to the getReferenceGlobal. This command retrieves all of the reference values, and that step only takes a few seconds. Overall, our job executed 3 different steps. When we click the plus sign, we can see the stats for each of those job steps and what was handled. Since no data was processed for the last 2 steps, they were more about referential data without any inserts or updates. That's an overview of the initial job setup for the first run of a Salesforce download. This can be applied to any of the initial downloads from Salesforce for various databases.